Have you ever wondered how people create vibrant watercolor paintings? Perhaps you've only ever used some cheap watercolor palettes as a child and thought that was all watercolor had to offer. I was there too, until I was in college and was introduced to watercolor from the tube. That was many years ago now, and with 10 years pursuing my career as a professional artist, it's still my favorite paint to work with. If you're new here, I'm Carly. I'm a visual artist based in Southern California. I'm really passionate about art education as well, and I work a lot with watercolor paints in my own practice. I also work with natural dyes, weaving, and in this video, I want to share with you my most essential supplies list for starting with watercolor painting. I'm also working on some other videos sharing the basic techniques of how to use watercolor, so subscribe to my channel to be updated on when those come out. They might be out by the time you're watching this, so you can go explore those and the other videos I have about my art processes. So let's get into it with the supplies for watercolor, starting with what I find the most crucial, the paper. It's very important to use watercolor paper to avoid any unnecessary frustration because the watercolor paper will let you move around the paint longer than would a regular paper that's going to dry up the paint quickly. It comes in different weights of thickness, and I suggest getting paper that's at least 140 pounds for practicing on. And then when you're going to make a more finished painting or just ready to experiment with more, I suggest getting a 300-pound weight paper. It also comes in cold press or hot press, and I prefer using cold press, which is a more textured paper, and some artists prefer using hot press for the smoother surface. Now, many watercolor painters will swear by stretching their paper, which is a process of wetting the paper fully, taping the edges to a board, and then it tightens up as it dries, and this mitigates warping as you paint. But I don't like the hassle of stretching my own paper, so I found ways to avoid that. One of these ways is, like I mentioned, to get 300-pound weight paper, which in my experience I found really holds up well to warping. And the other is to use an illustration board. With illustration board, you want to look for cold press, which is textured and meant for wet media, versus hot press, which is very smooth and meant for dry media. The illustration board comes in different weights as well, and I tend to purchase number 300, which is professional grade. For my watercolor paintings, I pretty much only purchase Arches paper, which is a French brand that uses craft methods, and the paper quality really does make a difference. Last year, I made my largest painting yet at 3 feet by 5 feet on a really big piece of Arches paper that was 300-pound weight. It didn't have any noticeable warping at all. Next is brushes. I do suggest getting watercolor brushes, and you can find them labeled that way online or at an art supply store. There's round shape and flat shape. I mainly use round brushes, but I have some large flat ones I'll use every once in a while for larger washes of color. Now, if you end up painting with some kind of acrylic brush instead of a watercolor brush, you're probably not really going to notice much of a difference. But I would just say avoid brushes that are for oil painting because those bristles are really coarse and they're just not going to hold the water that well. So in general, look for watercolor brushes. You can find a lot of different options from more affordable to more expensive out there. My last tip on brushes is to dedicate one brush for mixing because that brush is going to potentially get damaged with all of the mixing of paint. So for this, I like using a flat brush. Next is the palette for mixing the puddles of pigment. I like to use these bigger, deeper well palettes rather than the smaller circular palettes, although I do have some of those on hand. Along with the palette, you'll need one of these little bottles for dropping your water into the pigment in the palette. I like to get these ones, and you can find something similar if you search up small travel bottle, but you can also use a squeeze bottle of some sort. When mixing, I always recommend my students to start with about a quarter size amount of water and test the color from there and see if they want to add more pigment to go darker or add more water to go lighter. So on that note, you should also have some scraps of watercolor paper on hand for testing your colors as you paint. I would say you should use watercolor paper and not regular paper for testing on, because then you can really see the true color that the pigment is going to dry as. So I just keep less expensive 140-pound paper on hand for this purpose. Then you need some kind of container for rinsing your brush in. I use a mason jar, but any cup of old yogurt container or something like that will do. Along with rinsing your brush, you'll want to wipe it off sometimes, so I recommend a hand towel you can reuse over and over for this purpose. Now the main event is the paint. There's a range of brands that are great to go with and a variety of student grade and artist or professional grade options. If you're just starting out, the student grade is a great go-to and going to be affordable, but some colors I find can appear kind of chalky, like the pigment's just not very strong or clear. Whereas the professional grade, or sometimes known as artist grade paint, is going to have more pigment loaded in it and has a better archival quality. I tend to purchase the Winsor Newton Professional Series, and they also offer a student grade line called Cotman. I also use a lot of the Grumbacher brand, but I have a whole mixture of stuff that I've purchased over the years. In addition, I buy gouache paint and I mix it interchangeably with watercolor. I don't really see much of a difference between the two mediums in general when you're just adding water. It's really when you add white gouache into other colors of gouache that you can get a range of those more opaque or solid tones that gouache is known for. Purchasing paint colors could be a bit overwhelming since you'll find quite a range of primary, secondary, and specialty colors, but a lot of the colors you're going to see in the art store can also be mixed from just a few colors, and that's fun to explore as well. Rather than feeling like you have to buy up every color you might want to use, no, you can actually be mixing and exploring. Although I have a variety of colors in my paint box to use, I've found that there's really 10 colors I use most often whenever I'm doing any painting. So I wanted to share this list with you to help give you some direction, and it might give you an idea of where you can get started. So first is cadmium red light, then cadmium yellow medium, cadmium lemon, and primary red, which I purchase as a gouache. Yellow ochre is another one, burnt umber. I use turquoise a lot, sometimes called phthalo turquoise, ultramarine blue. I also like Prussian blue, and I find I use Payne's gray a lot to kind of sadden or darken colors. So this is basically a primary color palette, like red, yellow, blues, with some neutrals that you can then mix a wide range of secondary colors from. So I hope this video makes it easier for you to begin working with watercolor from the tube. I personally love watercolor and gouache paint for their fluidity and honestly even the intensity of the painting process, like how focused I need to be when creating so that I don't make a wrong move. I find I reach a meditative state in this process. I also love the way you layer colors, blend colors, and have lots of surprises along the way, and most are happy accidents, I find. I have the list of materials mentioned below and links to different materials that I like. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I wish you a peaceful journey ahead with watercolor.